late one for KU playing at Colorado, and it's one that we're going to really find out what this team is. Can they finally start getting it done on the road?
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here with Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. And thank you to everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. Thank you as well for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. And on today's episode, we are previewing Kansas and Colorado. This is actually a quick aside. We had the preview recorded, and then this press release came out about the Bill Self news. So we wanted to add a little something here. Here's the statement from KU Athletics. Kansas men's basketball coach Bill Self felt under the weather earlier today, and out of an abundance of caution was taken to LMH Health, where he received IV fluids. He is feeling better, but did not accompany the team to Boulder. So it sounds like he's not going to be coaching this game. Obviously, if you're looking for a bigger breakdown on just this news, we had a bonus episode out for it. If you're just talking about this specific game, it does add a storyline to the game. Who's going to be coaching the team for KU? Jeremy Case is the associate head coach. Maybe that just makes sense title-wise. Curtis Townsend is his longest tenured assistant. Maybe that makes sense from just that perspective. Jock Vaughn is probably the guy that I think a lot of KU officials and KU fans want to see, because he could potentially be the future head coach at Kansas. So maybe he'd get kind of an audition opportunity in playing a road game against a feisty Colorado team. It'll be very interesting to see how this all plays out for Kansas. And certainly it'll be a big storyline in the aftermath. But back to the preview here for KU and Colorado. Network. On today's episode, we're previewing Kansas at Colorado. Another opportunity for KU on the road here. We'll get to the Colorado scouting report, players to watch for both teams, Kansas keys to coming out with the victory, and more. Before we get into any of the action, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, code Locked On College to get $20 off your first purchase with Game Time. So KU takes on Colorado. This is a 10 p.m. game in Colorado. So our postcast show will be very early in the morning, basically, is one way of looking at it, but hopefully no overtime there, right? And one of the big questions here is just going to be, can Kansas win on the road and be a consistent force overall? Part of being a consistent team, part of being a consistent force is, can you win consistently? And part of that is doing it on the road. We've seen Kansas now have some really good moments at home. We did see them have a good moment on the road at NC State, but overall they're still 1-3 on the road. Overall, the past 3 seasons, it has not gone well for Kansas on the road. So can they, and it's not just about this game, this week, Kansas is at Colorado in this game, they're at Kansas State in the next game. And you look at Kansas State, they've lost 3 straight games in Manhattan. So they've struggled there recently. And then you look at playing at Colorado. Kansas won at Colorado last year, though it was a little bit closer of a game than maybe you were expecting. And you also look at, because this is not just about playing on the road, it's against playing, or it's about playing on the road in an environment with, altitude and how that can kind of affect you as a team. And last year, even though Kansas won at Colorado in altitude, they did lose at Utah, which was not a great Utah team in altitude on the road. Now, obviously a different team to where they are this year, but we know they've struggled on the road this year, even similar to last year. So I think in general, for you to get to where you want to go, for you to feel like you are a real, I don't know what the right word would be, like contender, I guess, necessarily, like you need to start winning on the road, right? Go 2-0 this week if you are a very serious team, because if you don't, you're probably just one of those teams where it's like, we're going to look at it and go, okay, this is a solid team who has their moments and are inconsistent. Hopefully they just get hot in the NCAA tournament. If you want to prove that, like, no, you're one of the better teams in the country, like, it's not just about beating the best teams, which you did with Iowa State. It's also about consistently beating opponents you're supposed to beat and being able to do it on the road, at home, on neutral courts, right? You've gotten some big wins on neutral courts. You've gotten some big wins at home. You need to do it more consistently on the road. And when you look at the best Bill Self teams, when you look at the years they're winning the Big 12, they're going at least 4-5 or 5-4 on the road. So you've already dropped 2 on the road. Go equal it back out. Go win both games on the road this week. And obviously that starts with trying to win at Colorado. And I think in general too, like we're talking about, okay, you dropped some of those early games. You can at least make up for it a little bit if you can win these next two, from the standpoint of, if you would have said through the first 7 games, could you go whatever it'd be 2-2 on the road through the first 7 games? That would have been a little bit more manageable. But right now you're sitting at 0-2 and you have to win both those games to accomplish that feat, right? I'm also going to be curious as we talk about being on the road and talk about being in altitude, how that affects this game from really one main standpoint. I mean, Colorado is a team that likes to get out in transition. They like to run. They're going to score in transition. Kansas will push when they want to. Like, obviously, that has an effect on the game in terms of the speed of the game and the altitude and how tired or not tired or fatigued are certain players. That means that your bench play becomes important, because if certain guys get more tired with the altitude, like maybe this isn't a situation where, Melvin Council in a lot of games will give you 35, 36, 37 minutes. Maybe it ends up having to be 32 because you're playing at altitude. And then you start looking at, okay, maybe the bench becomes just slightly more important in this game. And I think that's kind of an interesting storyline in this one, from a standpoint of, we saw Jaden Dawson come in last game and nail a 3 against Baylor. Could he be somebody who, gets a little extra playing time? We haven't seen Cole Rosario recently, right? Like, is that going to be something where we could see him a little bit more often in a game like this? So it's going to be interesting, like how that impacts the potential rotation, or do we see a few minutes shaved off here or there for some of the starters? And then I think that also dovetails into Darryn Peterson's situation, right? Like, you're talking about a player who hasn't been able to finish a game for KU so far, and with the situation he's had with cramping and stuff like that, I can't imagine that's going to be easier to overcome playing in altitude. And so if this ends up being a game where Peterson has to play even less minutes than we're used to, and definitely can't finish the game because of the altitude, what does that mean for KU? What situation does that put you in, and who can step up? We saw Melvin Council step up when KU played at NC State. We saw Council step up in the second half at UCF, but they're going to need other guys to step up as well throughout the game when Peterson's in or out, but especially if this limits his minutes even more playing in altitude. So I think the impact of that is going to be very interesting with what it does to kind of the KU lineups, rotations, and minutes played. All right, let's get on to our Colorado scouting report. We'll get into players to watch for both teams. We'll get into their strengths and weaknesses, Kansas keys to the game still coming, Hawks to soar, all that and more. This is Locked on Jayhawks. This episode of the show is brought to you by Game Time, and college basketball is in the full swing of things here. Packed stadiums and arenas, being right there in the middle of it all. The energy, the bands, the moments you remember forever. But actually getting tickets, well, that part used to be frustrating with long queues, logins, and price jumps at checkout. But that's why Game Time gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to unlock college basketball tickets and experiences in just a few taps. I'm looking right now. I know there's a lot of Kansas fans in the Colorado area. I know there's a lot of Kansas fans who use this as a travel opportunity to go up to Boulder for the game, whether they're driving or flying in. And you can get tickets to the game on Game Time. I'm looking right now, $77 for reserved bleachers, section 6, row 15. Or one of the super deals on Game Time is row 3 in section 6 for $146. You can find all those deals on Game Time. And here's the beauty of it. Maybe you've never been to Colorado's arena. You're like, are these seats good? Are these seats obstructed? You can see the seat view on the image on the Game Time app. So make sure to download the Game Time app. Take the guesswork out of buying college basketball tickets with Game Time. Download it, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Thanks again for joining us here on Locked on Jayhawks. Don't forget you can join the Everydayer Club as well, where you can get the ad-free version of Locked on Jayhawks, compatible with all your major podcast apps, and you get an invite to the members-only Locked on Everydayer Club Discord server. So you can chat with me, you can chat with our Big 12 hosts, you can chat with the Portal Talking, you can chat with our Chiefs hosts, and a lot of fun you can have on the Discord, but also the ad-free version of Locked on Jayhawks. It's lockedonpodcast.com/everydayer, lockedonpodcast.com/everydayer. Okay, so Colorado comes into this one 12-6 on the season. They're 2-3 in Big 12 play. They actually started 2-0. They had wins over Utah, who's the worst team in the Big 12, and then Arizona State, who is kind of on that bottom tier of things. And then they've dropped their last 3. They lost to Tech, albeit that was in Boulder, and they only lost by 2 to a good Texas Tech team. Then they lost at Cincinnati and at West Virginia. But you look at KenPom, they're basically a top 80 team on KenPom. They're like 95th on Bart Torvik. Now, if you average out where both sites have them, on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. You're looking at an offense that is in the mid 60s. You're looking at a defense that's around the 130, 140 range. So better on offense than defense there, with defense that hasn't been too great. You look at the strengths and weaknesses for the Buffaloes. Strengths, height and length has been a strength for them. They are 30th nationally in average height. So they've got, I forget if it's pronounced Doc or Dak, but we saw him play well last year for Colorado and Buffalo. He's a 7-footer who's lengthy. Rancik is 6'11". He's their main 4. He'll sometimes play the 5. Elijah Malone's their other backup 5, 6'10", 270. They've got a freshman who's 6'9", 230 who can play the 4 or the 3. And then they got a couple 6'5" and 6'6" wings. So they've got good size, mainly the 3 through 5, little smaller guards at 1 and 2, but those positions specifically good size for them. And they use that to score inside to their benefit. 74th percentile in 2-point percentage, 94th percentile in paint points per game. They are really strong paint, so away from the rim, but in the paint. So basically from 5 feet out, but still in the paint and in the mid range. Not as good at the rim, oddly enough, but still they're scoring on the interior for the most part, at least inside the arc. Transition play has been really good for Colorado. I think this is something that makes sense if you're a team in altitude. Be a team who's really good in transition. Try to push the tempo, try to run, because you have the opportunity to, try to wear the other team out. So they're 86th percentile in field goal attempt percentage in transition. So they're on the higher end of it if you're just talking frequency. Beyond the frequency, they're in the 93rd percentile in fast break points per game, averaging over 15 fast break points per game. So they a lot of them. They use it a lot. Definitely a dangerous team in transition, especially because you look at some of those big men, they can run the floor pretty well with a couple of them. Don't turn it over is another strength for Colorado. They are in the 89th percentile in turnover rate offensively and the 90th percentile in assist to turnover rate offensively. Now, KU hasn't been a team who forces a ton of turnovers, though they did against Iowa State, but Colorado is not one of those teams that it's typically easy to do against. Free throws is another advantage or strength for Colorado. They get there at a solid amount, 76th percentile in free throw attempt rate. So they get there a good amount, and they convert them at a really high level, 95th percentile in free throw percentage shooting as a team. So they get to the line a decent amount and they take advantage. 4 weaknesses for the Buffaloes. So they do shoot well from 3 in terms of percentage, but it's very low volume. So they're not a team who jacks up a ton of threes. 10th percentile in 3-point attempt rate, 15th percentile in 3-point attempts per game. So even if Colorado gets hot, they could shoot 40%, but they could just go 8 of 20, and it might not be a backbreaker. It's kind of similar to like some Kansas teams we've seen in the past, right? Defensively has not been a strength for them either. They're just in the 44th percentile in raw defensive rating, so below average nationally, which you think about it, there's over like 360 teams nationally. They're also just 37th percentile in steal rate. So not a team who's forcing a ton of turnovers, and overall the defense has struggled for them. One of the reasons it struggled and their next weakness is fast break defense. If you're just looking at quad 1 and quad 2 games, so against the better opponents that they played, which Kansas falls into that category, they are in the 37th percentile in allowing fast break points per game. They're giving up 13.6 fast break points per game. So they give up too many in transition. We'll see if KU can take advantage of that here. And then when you look at just Big 12 play, their final weakness here is actually shooting at the rim plus threes. So analytically speaking, the most efficient shots you can take are at the rim and good 3-point shooting. And they're in the 28th percentile nationally. If you just look at conference play only numbers for teams nationally, 28th percentile at the rim. So they're not finishing at the rim enough in conference play. 37th percentile in conference play in above the break threes, and 15th percentile in corner threes during conference play. So you total it all up. If you look at their at the rim plus 3-point shooting percentage, they're just in the 30th percentile there in conference play. So they've struggled from the analytically efficient zones. Players to watch in this one, we'll start with Colorado. Isaiah Johnson is a 6'1" freshman guard. He's been a really good find for Colorado as just a freshman. He's going for 15.8 points, 52% from the floor, 44% from 3, 82 at the foul line. Very, very efficient scorer. He can get hot in a hurry. He has double the amount of 20-point games as he has single-digit games. So he's definitely somebody who you got to be careful on, and, could easily go for 20, 25 points and kind of take over a game. Then you got Bengot Doc, who is the 7-foot junior who we saw play really well against Kansas. in Boulder a season ago. So he's averaging 11.4 points, 7.3 rebounds per game, also gets 1.7 blocks per game. He's a 7-footer who's a very mobile and is very skilled. And like I said, last year against, he had 16 points and 5 rebounds on 7 of 10 shooting. But what does, like, that doesn't even do it justice. That was in just 18 minutes. So like, imagine if he would have played 30 minutes, the stats he was on pace to kind of have there. So very good player who's gotten even better this year. And one that I will say this, like, I do think, if you remember, Hunter Dickinson was unstoppable for Kansas in Boulder. And I do think it was an interesting matchup where it was like, Hunter can't defend the mobility of Dak, whatever it is, and Dak can't defend the size and strength of Hunter on the other end. So you wound up with both guys kind of going off. Hunter ends up helping KU get the win there. But this year it'll be different because you have Flory, who's more of the mobile big. So maybe he's able to better defend Dak, but are you going to get the same offense? Probably not. So very kind of interesting how the matchups cross up last year compared to this year. But KU players to watch, we're going to go Darryn Peterson. He just had 26 against Baylor. Felt like easily it could have been 30 or even 40 if the game would have been closer, if he would have been able to stay in as the game went on and needed to ask out. Going back to what we talked about at the Open, how does the altitude affect Darryn Peterson? Do we see him play even less minutes? Does it make the cramps even more likely at some point, earlier on in the game than we're used to? Now, the flip side of it is, I think when you look at the zones that Colorado typically allows shots in, I think it does bode well for Darryn Peterson to have a big, efficient scoring game for KU. So I think that'll be very interesting there. And then Melvin Council is our other player to watch for KU. He's averaging over 13 points, about 5 assists per game, and really solid for KU. He's been one of KU's best players on the road this year, though. We look obviously to the NC State game, that's going to skew the stats a little bit, but like you think of the UCF game as well, he's been really important for KU in these big moments on the road. Now, one of the other things for Council, we go back to Isaiah Johnson, and just in general, Colorado's like 2 leading scorers, or 2 of their top 3 are their guards. So one of the guards that Council is going to be guarding is going to be important for him on the defensive end. Maybe it's Johnson. And then you also look at him, needing to be a scorer for KU, especially because we've seen him really pick up the scoring when Peterson has gone out of games. Well, if Peterson has to play less because of the altitude, now Council all of a sudden has that bigger, load that he has to kind of carry for KU. All right, let's finish up with our keys to the game for KU's offense, KU's defense. We get to our player matchup of the game, and we'll get the Hawks to the sword next. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks again for joining us here on Locked On Jayhawks. Don't forget to check out the Everydayers Club, where you can get the ad-free version of Locked On Jayhawks and also join our Discord server. You can ask me questions. You can suggest content for the show. We can just chat, and you can also join a bunch of the different group chats with the Locked On hosts and many of the other Everydayers. LockedOnPodcast.com/Everydayer. It's also in the show notes. Our keys to the game for KU. Let's start with the KU offense. Drive and kick. So this is also where, we're just talking about players to watch. Melvin Council, he comes into play here, right? He's good at driving and kicking. He has the speed to get by his man, then drive, and then kind of dish it out. And I don't know, in my head, I just envision like Council doing that with Trey White a lot for some reason. But anyway, Colorado is in just the 15th percentile nationally in defending drive and kicks, just in terms of the efficiency allowed on that play. So Colorado has not been the best team at defending drive and kicks. And I don't know if they're playing a lot of 2-big basketball or bigger basketball, to where if you can break down your guy and force rotations or force, the help of the defense, that they're going to be a little slower footed by playing a little bigger to get back to the shooter. I don't know what the reason is, but Kansas needs to be prepared to drive and kick, and the shooter's got to be ready off ball then, right? And then I would say get out in transition for KU. So this is obviously going to require being well-conditioned. This is also going to require probably going a little deeper on the bench, because if they're going to want to play fast at times and you're going to want to play fast at times, it can wear you out in the altitude. So that's going to be important there. But Colorado gives up 1.09 points per possession in transition. That is the most points per possession that they're giving up in any category. Now, that's not that crazy of a number, because typically teams are going to do better in transition, right? Like, oh, I have numbers. Of course, the offense is going to be more efficient. But you look at it too, like Colorado, again, something we mentioned in the strengths and weaknesses categories, that they're giving up 13.6 fast break points per game, 37th percentile in just quad 1 and quad 2 games. So for Kansas, get out in transition and take advantage of that. The other one for the KU defense now, moving over to there, is keep them out of transition as much as you possibly can, because Colorado, I just mentioned 1.09 points per possession is what they're giving up, which is not a great number. Colorado's offense is scoring 1.27 points per possession in transition. So they are really putting up good numbers. Transition, they have bigs who can run the floor. They will push it. They will use the altitude to their advantage. Definitely a dangerous team when they get out in transition. And so that'll be important for KU. Can you keep them out of transition as much as possible? And it becomes interesting because KU has not been a great offensive rebounding team. Is this a game where it actually makes more sense for KU to continue to not be a good offensive rebounding team and basically almost punt it and say, we're just going to send numbers back? I don't know. That'll be an interesting strategy and discussion for Bill Self and staff. And then the other one for the KU defense is defend cuts off the ball. Colorado is in the 87th percentile in scoring efficiency on perimeter cuts. So that means that, you know, somebody's going to have the ball and somebody off ball is going to cut to the rim, or maybe there's some actions to open up a cut. Basically, you need your help defenders, you need your off ball defenders to be aware and to be ready to be back cut at any moment to try not to give up one of those easy buckets, right? That's going to be very important for KU. Our player matchup in this one is Sebastian Rancik versus Bryson Tiller. That's the Rancik is the primary four-man for Colorado. He'll play some five. He's 6'11", 220. And when he's in at the 4 or 5, he's a stretch big man. Then you look at Tiller, he's obviously a mobile big man in his own. And the last two games, I know the stats weren't as good against Baylor for Tiller as they were in the previous game against Iowa State, but I thought the aggressiveness carried over. I thought he stayed aggressive in both games, and that's just what I want to see from Tiller. Be aggressive on the offensive glass. Be aggressive on the defensive end. Drive to the rim. Even if you're missing the shot, a lot of times, like, it can set up a better opportunity for an offensive rebound, or it's just putting pressure on the defense. Or sometimes you get fouled. Sometimes you get a better shot. When Tiller is aggressive, same with Marco Jackson. Those two guys are like, if you can keep that switch flipped on aggressive at all times on the court, I guess, then both of those guys are going to be very helpful players for KU. And Tiller has the chance to be a future superstar down the road if that. But you look at Rancik, he's averaging 13 points, 5.5 rebounds per game. He can shoot the three a little bit, so it becomes a interesting, difficult matchup. And he actually had his breakout game last year. I think he was a freshman. When he came to Allen Fieldhouse, he had his season best 19 points for Colorado, so he's definitely one to watch there. You look at KU, Tiller is averaging 9.1 points per game in wins. He's only averaging 5.6 points per game in losses. He's averaging 6.3 rebounds in wins. He's only averaging 4.2 rebounds in losses. He's averaging 1 point blocks per game in wins. He's only averaging 0.2 blocks per game in losses. He's shooting 49% in wins. He's only shooting 36% in losses. There is a big difference, a big schism for this team winning and losing based on how Bryson Tiller plays, right? Like, we can talk about what's the availability of Darryn Peterson and, you know, is Melvin Council going to be hot and all these different things. But when Tiller plays well, Kansas becomes a much more formidable team. So that goes into this, the matchup, having two skilled big men go at each other. I think it'll be a fun matchup and one that could heavily determine the outcome here. Our hawk to soar. Alluded to this earlier in players to watch, but Colorado gives up a ton of shots in a couple different areas. In the paint, so not at the rim, but in the paint. So outside of 4.5 feet from the rim, but still in the paint. And they give up a ton of mid-range twos. Analytically, it's actually a good sound strategy for Tad Boyle, but they've been burned there. Maybe they're giving up way too open. Well, that's where Darryn Peterson comes in, because, and this is where, like, the analytic of basketball meets the art of basketball, right? Because it's like mid-range shots in general are less analytically valuable than at the rim or shooting threes. But if you're getting wide open mid-range shots every time because they're over-helping on those two areas, we got to kind of just take the mid-range. And that is the one thing. Like, Peterson is good enough on mid-range, then it actually is a valuable shot. Peterson's shooting 52% on mid-range, which is like the equivalent of shooting like 35% from three. So that actually is a good shot for Kansas when Peterson's taking a mid-range. Peterson's also second on the team in the paint area in terms of shots per game there, and he's shooting over 60% there. So as long as he can hold up with the altitude, he actually is in a really good matchup in terms of what Colorado typically gives up shot-wise. and what shots he's typically taking and what shots he's making at a high percentage. Although Peterson kind of makes them from everywhere, so maybe it's not really matchup dependent. But yeah, we're going to go out on a limb and say that Darryn Peterson has another big game for KU scoring. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked on Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. Check out the Everydayer Club as well. And we'll see you next time for a late night or early morning, depending on how you look at it, postcast for KU Colorado right here on Locked on Jayhawks.